Mr. Peterson seemed like the perfect elderly neighbor until he stood up at our party and admitted something that made everyone question everything they knew about him. When we moved into our new house last spring, Mr. Peterson was the first person to welcome us to Maple Street. He was this sweet 70-year-old man with silver hair that was always perfectly combed and these bright blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He lived in the tidy yellow house next door with his wife, who I rarely saw but knew was dealing with some health issues. Every morning, I'd see him watering his roses or sweeping his front porch, always waving cheerfully when he spotted me getting ready for work. The thing about Mr. Peterson was that he seemed almost too good to be true. When we were struggling to get our lawn mower started during our first week, he appeared with his own mower and took care of our entire front yard without being asked. When a storm knocked down a branch in our backyard, we came home to find it neatly chopped up and stacked by our fence. He never made a big deal about helping. He'd just do these things and wave off our thanks with that gentle smile of his. Our neighborhood had been going through a rough patch lately. Over the past few months, there had been a string of break-ins that had everyone on edge. The weird thing was, nothing major was ever stolen. People would come home to find their doors unlocked or a window slightly open, but their valuables would still be there. Sometimes they'd notice small things moved around or cleaned. The police were baffled, and everyone was installing new security systems and doorbell cameras. The whole situation had this eerie quality that made everyone jumpy and suspicious of strangers. We decided to throw a housewarming party to try to bring some positive energy back to the neighborhood and get to know everyone better. I spent weeks planning it, wanting everything to be perfect. I made homemade decorations, prepared way too much food, and invited everyone within a 3-block radius. The weather was perfect that Saturday afternoon, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that kept the mosquitoes away. Mr. Peterson arrived early, as I somehow knew he would. He brought a beautiful potted orchid and insisted on helping me arrange the food table, even though I told him he was a guest and should relax. He had this nervous energy about him that I hadn't seen before. His hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted the plates, and he kept glancing around like he was looking for something or someone. As more neighbors arrived, the party started to feel like exactly what our street needed. Kids were running around the backyard. Adults were mingling and sharing stories, and there was this warm, community feeling that had been missing since all the break-in anxiety started. Mrs. Johnson from 2 houses down brought her famous potato salad, and the couple from the corner house brought their guitar and started playing soft background music. But I kept noticing Mr. Peterson. He was usually so social and engaging, but today he seemed distracted and kept checking his watch. He barely touched his food and kept staring at his hands. When people tried to include him in conversations, his responses were short and distracted. I started to worry that maybe his wife's condition had worsened and he was dealing with some kind of family crisis. About 2 hours into the party, when everyone was relaxed and the conversation was flowing freely, Mr. Peterson suddenly stood up from his lawn chair. The movement was so abrupt and unexpected that conversations around him gradually died down. He cleared his throat, and something about his posture made everyone turn to look at him. My heart started racing because I could tell something significant was about to happen. His voice was quiet but steady as he began to speak. He said he had something he needed to tell everyone, something that had been weighing on him for months. The entire backyard fell silent except for the sound of kids playing in the distance and a dog barking somewhere down the street. Even the couple with the guitar stopped playing and looked over expectantly. Then he said the words that made my blood run cold. He confessed that he had been the one breaking into houses in our neighborhood for months. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This sweet, helpful old man who had been nothing but kind to us was admitting to being the neighborhood burglar. I looked around at everyone's faces and saw the same shock and disbelief I was feeling. Mrs. Johnson's mouth was literally hanging open, and the young couple from across the street looked like they were ready to run. My mind started racing through all the interactions I'd had with him. Had he been watching our house? Had he been inside when we were at work? The thought made me feel sick and violated. All those times he'd been so helpful and friendly. Was he just gathering information about when we were home and what we owned? Mr. Peterson continued talking, explaining that he was desperate for money because his wife's cancer treatment was draining their savings. They had already remortgaged their house and exhausted their retirement fund, but the medical bills kept piling up. He said he felt like he had no other options and that he was ashamed of what he had become. His voice was shaking now, and I could see tears in his eyes. Everyone just stared at him in stunned silence. Part of me felt sympathy for his situation. I couldn't imagine watching someone I loved suffer while feeling helpless to pay for their care. But another part of me felt betrayed and angry. How could this man who we had trusted and welcomed into our lives have been violating our homes and our sense of security? But then Mr. Peterson said something that completely changed everything. Update 1 posted 2 days ago. The response to my original post has been overwhelming, and so many of you have been asking for updates. What happened next was something none of us could have predicted. After Mr. Peterson confessed to being behind the break-ins, he took a deep, shaky breath and continued talking. He said there was more to the story that he needed everyone to understand. The look on his face was so sincere and pained that even though I was angry and confused, something made me keep listening instead of just calling the police right then and there. He explained that yes, he had been entering people's homes without permission, but then he said something that made everyone question everything we thought we knew about the situation. He revealed that he had never actually stolen anything from anyone's house. Instead, he had been doing something completely unexpected. He would carefully enter homes when families were away, but instead of taking things, he would clean. He would do dishes that had been left in sinks, organize cluttered areas, fix small problems like loose cabinet handles or dripping faucets, and then leave everything exactly as he found it or better. The shocked silence continued as he pulled a small notebook from his pocket. He said he had been keeping detailed records of every house he entered and every small repair or cleaning task he completed. He showed us pages and pages of notes written in his careful handwriting, documenting things like replaced burnt-out light bulb in hallway closet, and tightened loose banister rail, and cleaned coffee stains from kitchen counter. But the most surprising part was what he did next. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a stack of folded papers. These, he explained, were anonymous notes he had been leaving in people's houses with home security recommendations. He had been studying each home's vulnerabilities while he was there and then leaving detailed advice about how to make their homes safer. I remembered finding a note like that on my kitchen table about a month ago. It had detailed suggestions about adding motion sensor lights to our back porch and reinforcing our sliding door lock. At the time, I had assumed it was some kind of security company marketing gimmick and had thrown it away without giving it much thought. Now I realized it had been Mr. Peterson, trying to help us protect ourselves even while he was the one entering our home. Mrs. Johnson from down the street suddenly spoke up, her voice filled with amazement. She said she had found her house mysteriously clean several times over the past few months and had assumed her teenage daughter was finally developing some responsibility. She had even praised her daughter for the initiative, which had led to some very confused conversations. The young couple from across the street looked at each other with dawning recognition. They mentioned that they had noticed their leaky kitchen faucet had been fixed and their bathroom mirror had been rehung properly after being crooked for weeks. They had assumed the landlord had sent someone over without telling them. As more neighbors started sharing similar experiences, a picture began to emerge of Mr. Peterson as some kind of secret guardian angel of our neighborhood. But I still couldn't wrap my head around the whole situation. Even if his intentions were good, he was still breaking into our homes without permission. The violation of privacy and trust felt enormous, regardless of his motivations. Mr. Peterson seemed to understand everyone's conflicted feelings. He apologized profusely and said he knew what he had been doing was wrong, even if his intentions were to help. He explained that he had started small, just checking to make sure doors were properly locked after he noticed how careless some neighbors were with their security. But when he realized how many small problems people were living with that they either couldn't afford to fix or didn't have time to address, he felt compelled to help. The situation became even more complex when he revealed how he had been accessing people's homes. He hadn't been picking locks or breaking windows like everyone assumed. Instead, he had been taking advantage of unlocked doors, hidden spare keys, and open windows. His security notes weren't just helpful suggestions, they were based on the exact vulnerabilities he had used to enter each home. What struck me most was how methodical and caring his approach had been. He showed us that he had been keeping track of each family's schedule to make sure he never entered when anyone was home. He had notes about when kids got home from school, when people left for work, and when families typically went on vacation. It was thorough in a way that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. The party atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by this surreal situation where we were all trying to process what we had just learned. Some neighbors seemed touched by Mr. Peterson's secret acts of kindness, while others were clearly still upset about the invasion of privacy. The whole thing felt like something out of a movie rather than real life. But then Mr. Peterson dropped another bombshell that changed everything once again. Update 2. Posted 1 day ago. I've been getting so many messages asking what happened next, and honestly, I'm still trying to process everything myself. What Mr. Peterson revealed next was something that made the entire situation even more complicated and emotionally charged. He told us that his wife didn't actually have cancer. The silence that followed this revelation was different from the shocked quiet we'd experienced before. This felt heavier, more confused. If his wife wasn't sick, then why had he been doing all of this? What was his real motivation for entering our homes and helping with things we never asked for help with? Mr. Peterson's eyes filled with tears as he explained the real reason behind everything. His wife had been struggling with severe depression for the past 2 years. She had become increasingly isolated and had stopped taking care of herself or their home. Most days, she wouldn't get out of bed, and she had lost interest in all the activities and people that used to bring her joy. He said he had felt completely helpless watching the woman he loved disappear before his eyes. They had tried various treatments and approaches, but nothing seemed to help her reconnect with life or find motivation to engage with the world around her. He felt like he was losing her inch by inch, and the isolation was affecting him too. The break-ins had started almost by accident. One evening while walking their dog, he had noticed that our elderly neighbor 3 houses down had left her front door wide open. When he went to check on her, he found that she was fine but had simply forgotten to close the door after bringing in groceries. While he was there, he noticed that she had been struggling to reach items on high shelves and had been living with burnt-out light bulbs for weeks. After helping her with these small tasks, he said he felt useful and needed in a way he hadn't experienced in months. It gave him a sense of purpose during a time when he felt powerless to help the person who mattered most to him. So he started paying attention to other small ways he could help neighbors, initially through simple acts like the yard work and branch removal he had done for us. But as his wife's condition worsened, his need to feel helpful and connected to the community intensified. He began noticing unlocked doors and open windows during his evening walks, and eventually started entering homes to address small problems he observed. Each successful task made him feel less helpless and more like he was contributing something positive to the world. The security notes had been his way of justifying the boundary violations to himself. He convinced himself that if he was helping people protect themselves, then his unauthorized entries were serving a greater good. It was a way of rationalizing behavior that he knew was wrong but that fulfilled a deep emotional need during an incredibly difficult time. What made the situation even more heartbreaking was when he described how he would go home after these secret helping sessions and try to share his sense of accomplishment with his wife. He hoped that hearing about his positive impact on the neighborhood might inspire her or give her some reason to feel connected to the community again. But she was too deep in her depression to engage with his stories, which only made him feel more alone and desperate to find ways to feel useful. Several neighbors were crying by this point. Mrs. Johnson walked over and hugged Mr. Peterson, telling him that she understood why he had felt compelled to help, but that there were better ways to support both his wife and the community. Others nodded in agreement, though I could tell everyone was still processing the complexity of the situation. The young couple from across the street suggested that instead of secretly entering homes, Mr. Peterson could have organized a neighborhood volunteer group to help people with small household tasks. They pointed out that many people would have been grateful for help with things like changing light bulbs or fixing minor problems, especially elderly neighbors who might be struggling with these tasks. But then something happened that no one expected. Mrs. Peterson appeared at our back gate. She looked frail and tired, but she was dressed and had clearly made an effort to come outside and find her husband. This was the first time most of us had seen her in months, and her presence added another layer of emotion to an already overwhelming situation. She walked slowly over to where her husband was standing and took his hand. Then she looked around at all of us and apologized on behalf of both of them. She explained that she had figured out what her husband was doing weeks ago when she found his notebook and the security notes he had been writing. Instead of stopping him or being angry, she had been quietly proud of him for finding a way to channel his need to help into something positive, even if his methods were questionable. She said that watching him regain a sense of purpose had been one of the few bright spots during her darkest period, and she hadn't wanted to take that away from him. But seeing all of us gathered together and witnessing the community spirit at the party had made her realize that there were better ways for both of them to connect with neighbors and contribute to the community. She suggested that they work together to organize legitimate volunteer efforts that could address the kinds of problems her husband had been secretly fixing. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Instead of calling the police or demanding that Mr. Peterson face consequences for his actions, the entire group began brainstorming ways to channel his helpful instincts into positive community initiatives. Someone suggested starting a neighborhood skill-sharing network where people could request help with small household tasks and others could volunteer their time and expertise. Another neighbor proposed organizing monthly community work days where everyone could work together on projects that benefited the whole street. But the biggest surprise was still to come. Final update, posted today. The aftermath of that incredible housewarming party has been nothing short of amazing, and I wanted to share how everything ultimately turned out because so many of you have been following this story and asking for closure. First, I should address what happened immediately after Mrs. Peterson joined us in the backyard. Her presence completely shifted the energy of the situation. Instead of feeling like we were confronting someone who had violated our trust, it started to feel like we were all working together to solve a problem that affected the entire community. Mrs. Peterson's willingness to be vulnerable about her depression and her husband's response to it created this atmosphere of openness that I had never experienced with neighbors before. People started sharing their own struggles and the ways they had noticed small acts of kindness around the neighborhood that they now realized had been Mr. Peterson's doing. The elderly widow 3 houses down revealed that she had been finding her groceries mysteriously organized and her trash cans returned to perfect position every week for months. A single mother from the end of the block mentioned that her porch light had been replaced twice without explanation, and she had been grateful but puzzled about who was taking care of it. As more stories emerged, it became clear that Mr. Peterson's secret activities had been touching almost every household on our street in small but meaningful ways. While the method was definitely wrong, the impact had been genuinely positive for a lot of people who were struggling with their own challenges. What happened next was something that restored my faith in community and human nature. Instead of focusing on punishment or reporting the break-ins to authorities, everyone started talking about how to harness this spirit of mutual support in a way that respected everyone's boundaries and privacy. Mrs. Johnson suggested creating a neighborhood assistance network where people could post requests for help with small tasks, and others could volunteer to assist. The young couple from across the street offered to set up a simple online system where neighbors could communicate about needs and resources. But the most beautiful part was watching Mrs. Peterson engage with these conversations. You could literally see her becoming more animated and involved as the discussion progressed. The community problem-solving seemed to give her a sense of purpose and connection that she hadn't felt in a long time. Within a week of the party, we had established what we called the Maple Street Helpers Network. Mr. Peterson became the coordinator, using his detailed knowledge of everyone's needs and his organizational skills to match people who needed help with neighbors who had time and abilities to offer. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of secretly entering homes, Mr. Peterson now had a legitimate way to channel his desire to help. People would request assistance with everything from changing smoke detector batteries to organizing closets to small repair projects. He kept the same detailed records he had been maintaining before, but now everything was transparent and voluntary. Mrs. Peterson found her own role in the network by coordinating meal trains for neighbors dealing with health issues or family crises. Her experience with depression gave her a unique understanding of how to support people who were struggling, and she became an incredible resource for anyone going through difficult times. The security aspect wasn't forgotten either. Mr. Peterson used his knowledge of neighborhood vulnerabilities to organize home security workshops where he taught people how to better protect their homes. His detailed notes about unlocked doors and hidden keys became the basis for educational sessions that actually helped prevent real crime in our area. 3 months later, our street had been transformed into the kind of close-knit community that most people only dream about. We started having regular block parties, organized group activities for kids, and created a system for checking on elderly neighbors during extreme weather. The most unexpected development was that word of our network spread to other streets in the area. We started getting requests from neighboring blocks asking for help setting up similar systems. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson became something like local celebrities, sharing their story and helping other communities organize their own mutual aid networks. Mrs. Peterson's depression didn't disappear overnight, but having a meaningful role in the community and seeing the positive impact of their efforts gave her something to focus on beyond her own struggles. She started attending community events regularly and even began leading support groups for other people dealing with mental health challenges. The break-ins stopped completely, of course, but the problems Mr. Peterson had been secretly addressing continued to get resolved through the legitimate network. People were getting help with tasks they had been putting off for months or years, and neighbors were forming friendships based on shared projects and mutual support. Looking back on that surreal housewarming party, I'm amazed at how a situation that could have destroyed community trust instead became the foundation for something beautiful and lasting. Mr. Peterson's misguided but well-intentioned actions opened up conversations about the ways we all need help and the ways we can support each other. The whole experience taught me that people are often dealing with struggles we know nothing about, and that sometimes the most unexpected situations can lead to the most meaningful connections. Our neighborhood went from being a collection of strangers living near each other to being a genuine community where people look out for one another. 6 months later, we organized a first anniversary celebration of the Maple Street Helpers Network. Mr. Peterson stood up again to address the group, but this time his speech was about gratitude and community rather than confession and shame. Mrs. Peterson was right beside him, healthy and engaged and proud of what they had built together. The network has helped coordinate over 200 small projects, from installing grab bars for elderly neighbors to organizing study groups for kids to creating shared garden spaces in unused yards. What started as one man's misguided attempt to feel useful during a family crisis became a model for community support that has improved dozens of lives. I still think about that moment when Mr. Peterson first stood up at our party and made his shocking confession. None of us could have predicted where that conversation would lead or how it would change all of our lives. Sometimes the most difficult and unexpected situations create opportunities for growth and connection that never would have existed otherwise. Our street address might be the same, but Maple Street has become a completely different place to live, and I'm grateful every day for the strange series of events that brought us all together as a true community.